And welcome back. Let's get into some legal issues. And this one has to deal with the president, but it's not the Russia probe. In fact, it's Stormy Daniels. Yes, Stormy Daniels. Back in the news last month, the Wall Street Journal reported that the porn star was paid $130,000 in hush money to keep quiet about an affair with Donald Trump. Well, the check was reportedly cut a month before Election Day. Coincidence, you may ask? Well, the affair happened about a decade earlier, coincidentally right after Melania had Barron. I digress, though. But now we know where the money came from. Michael Cohen. You may remember him. He's an attorney at the Trump Organization and a pretty prominent one. He just said he paid that $130,000 out of his own pocket. Here's what Cohen told the New York Times, quote, "Neither the Trump Organization nor the Trump campaign was a party to the transaction, and neither reimbursed me for the payment, either directly or indirectly. The payment was lawful and was not a campaign contribution or a campaign expenditure by anyone," end quote. Now, Stormy's manager says Cohen's comments could invalidate that gag order and allow her to tell her story. Cha-ching. That all surfaced in response to a complaint filed by a government watchdog group to the Federal Election Commission. Now, it's also raising questions about whether any laws were broken here. And, you know, Common Cause filed this report. But let's dispense here with the insanity. Michael Cohen, just out of the goodness out of his heart, for no possible reason, wrote a check for $130,000. Now, I know you two are really nice guys.
That you don't think a lawyer could be a
How many clients have you guys written six-figure checks for just because?
This week?
Yes, exactly. Well, specifically, guys.
It's only Wednesday.
In terms of a violation, people should remember the name John Edwards, okay? And remember the then presidential candidate and keeping quiet an affair that he was having as well here. It got him indicted, okay? Now, more than that, there's a question as to whether or not the check that he cut to Daniels, or to a real name Clifford, if you want to get technical, was an unreported in-kind contribution for the Trump campaign or an unreported expenditure by the campaign. Because if the money was to keep her quiet, then that is a campaign contribution. That has to deal with the campaign. And whether or not he says he did it out of the goodness of his heart, that's where there's a question right now, and that's really, if you tie it back to Edwards as well, did he use funds in effect here, and was he ever reimbursed by Trump? I doubt that he ever wrote the check just because.
I think the big problem is that, you know, it's too complicated in terms of campaign finance. You ought to be able to report that on a postcard, and that way you don't have to get into all these details. But I think that there's a school of thought that says that if it's on behalf of the campaign, and it's for political purposes, it's in furtherance of the campaign. And again, it's interesting that it's 10 years ago and it happens right before the campaign, right before the election, that it could actually end up being a violation of campaign.
Because 1971, in campaign election law, in the Election Campaign Act of 1971, they said that a secret payment is equatable to a campaign contribution.
As long as it satisfies the elements and the factual elements that that Mayo refers to. You know, this is one of those looks like it, smells like it, and, you know, how far does it go? I mean, look.
Does the Bar Association say anything about this as an attorney to do this? Are we crossing ethical lines here, forgetting for the moment legal?
You very well may be. I mean, it is a very suspicious payment for a lawyer to do it on behalf of a client, claim that it's not a campaign contribution, it was not related to the campaign, but obviously it was intended to protect his reputation, very conveniently right before the election. From a circumstantial standpoint, if you look at this, it is hard to imagine it not being in furtherance of the campaign. And to say he has not been compensated indirectly, he's still the lawyer. I'm sure he's still getting paid. I'm sure he's not going anywhere. And I'm sure he's making a good amount of money.
Now let's get to the second point of this. The manager of Stormy Daniels says, hey, he talked about the check. We basically had an NDA here. We had an agreement here that we weren't going to talk about this. All of a sudden, he put this in public purview. Game over. I'm going to start, going to the highest bidder. Just wait till I talk. I have a story to tell or an interview to sell. So, does he have a point?
He has a great point, and on top of that, in the realm of reality, you stop and look at even if even if he hasn't breached the confidentiality agreement, what's the remedy for Donald Trump? So let's assume she goes out and she says this is what happened. Okay, he can sue her. When you sue her, you open yourself up to even more discovery. So the $130,000, which seems like a pretty small amount actually when what we're talking about is of such magnitude, really probably won't make that much of a difference to her. Secondly, you know, she's now much more marketable. She'll be able to go out there and make a lot of money selling books and doing interviews. But I do think that when you start to talk about the amount of money and the fact that that was a particular number, you know, specific number, there's a good chance that they did breach the agreement.
Well, you have to look at the agreement as well. I mean, I'm not so sure that that's the case. I mean, the story was out there. The fact that she got paid was out there. I don't know.
And she did an interview in Touch magazine back in 2011 that referenced some of this, but nonetheless, the agreement, as we said, in October of 16, they write up the papers. So you're right, we got to see the language of it. But if it was that both parties agreed to not discuss, period, and he's basically giving factual statements that he gave her $130,000 himself, we shall see. Okay. We're going to jump to a quick commercial break, but when we come back, if you haven't seen this video, you really have to. Police department in Tennessee facing a $10 million lawsuit. That after the sheriff caught on tape saying, shoot a suspect to protect the police cars. And we're going to get into the whole issue about chasing stolen cars here as police policy as well, but you got to see the story to believe it. Stay with us.